Alright, boys and girls, today what we're going to do is learn how to use some watercolor washes to create some various silhouette paintings. And the first one we're going to do is right behind me. It looks like this. It's sort of a seascape. And you'll be learning how to use the graduated wash along with the silhouette, as you can see right here behind me. And we'll be using a dagger stroke for the silhouette, or you can choose to use Sharpie if you're not where you want to be with the dagger strokes yet. And the dagger strokes are used to create those leaf-like appearances here, and also the birds here. So we'll be going through those things. And then for the second watercolor wash, for the second watercolor painting, we're going to create another type of silhouette. And for these, the sky's the limit. It just depends on what you want to do. Alright, let's get started. So the first thing you're going to want to do is get your materials. So you're going to need paper and your paints, a paintbrush, and I prefer two types of paintbrushes. First of all, a thicker sable brush, and secondly, a thinner sable brush. Now the sable brushes typically have a point, so if I were to dip this in my water here and pull on it, I could get it to have kind of a point to it. And those two brushes are the ones we're going to use first. So you're going to need water, as you can see here, paints, and why don't we go ahead and activate those paints. And what do I mean by activate the paints? Simply take your sable brush, dip it in water, and squeeze a couple of drops into each color that you're going to be using. In this case, we'll probably be using all the different colors, so I'm going to squeeze a few drops of paint into each color tray. And again, one of the things I like to tell my students is watercolor is called watercolor for a reason. It's mostly water. It's a little bit of color. That's why these trays are so small. They'll last you a very, very long time if you use them correctly. Because again, for watercolor, it's mostly water with a little bit of color. So again, any colors that you want to use, you're going to put a little bit of water into those. And what that does, it starts to dissolve the pigments into the water. Another thing you're going to need is a napkin of some kind. Doesn't really matter what kind, but a napkin of some kind. So I'm going to move my paints off here to the side. Alright, the next thing I would like you to do is fold your paper. And we're going to fold it and tear it. So first fold we're going to make is going to look like this. We're going to fold it the long way, because if you recognize the painting behind me, you can see that it's a long landscape type of painting. What I want you to do is fold it and then go back and forth several times with your finger here. Alright, now if you have a pair of scissors, it's going to make this easy. Then I'm going to fold it back along that same line. And again, go back and forth. And what you're basically doing is creating a seam so that you can tear this pretty well. So I did that back and forth. Let's go back one more time. And then here's a little trick for you. If you take some of that watercolor water, just a little dab, put it on your finger, and put it across that edge like this. What that does, it weakens the paper even more than just twisting it, and then you can tear it pretty well. So again, just a little dab of water. You don't need a ton of water there, just a dab. And then what we can do is just support it and tear it very simply now. And again, if you have scissors, that might make this easier. Alright, so then we have two pieces. One of them is going to be for our landscape. And then for the other one, what I would like you to do is fold it in half going this direction. So again, fold it in half going this direction, and we'll do the same process. So this is going to be one of our paintings. Put that aside. And this is going to be another one of our paintings. So I fold it along the crease, then I fold it again, back the opposite direction. Then I take a little bit of water, put a little tiny bit of water on my finger. I don't need a lot. I just want to take a little bit just so it's wet. And I'm going to wet that seam. And again, what that does, that weakens that paper at the seam, and so it makes it a little easier to tear. Alright, so we've got we can make two paintings on these. These make nice little cards that you can send to somebody. And we have a landscape over here. So let's start with the landscape. And what we're going to start with is a graduated wash, and then we're going to move into more of a wet on wet wash. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to start right down the middle, and you can see behind me this blue stripe. And I'm going to soak my brush, fill it with blue. Try not to get this on I'll get it where you can see it on the screen. And I'm going to fill the brush again, mostly water, a little bit of paint. And what I'm going to do is try to go right across the middle. Right across the middle. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're just going to go one stroke right across the middle. And back and forth. If you need more water, that's fine. Now remember, mostly water, a little bit of paint. Then what I do is I dab my brush, wipe it off a little bit, and then I'm going to go to my next color, which happens to be from blue. I go to red. So we're going to go blue, and then we're going to go red. I'm just going to overlap slightly because red and blue actually will make a purple when they meet. So we're going to overlap slightly and just drag those colors back and forth. It's okay that they run into each other. And I'm going to get a little more red and go just another little bit higher now. And again, work my way across something like this, just a big long horizontal line. Alright, then we're going to do the same thing underneath. So again, I load my brush full of red, and I'm going to come across the bottom. And it's okay if they meet. That's actually going to be okay if they meet and kind of look like a reflection off the water. We're going to go across the bottom. Okay, and then we're going to move to orange. And we're going to go from orange above the red. So right up here, we're going to start moving into orange. And yes, you do want to overlap slightly. And again, we're gradually moving from a dark value of orange to a light value of orange. And I'm going to get some more orange. Dip my brush, load my brush, and I'm going to just go to the edge of that red and back and forth. And then I saved a little bit of room for some yellow. So I am going to clean my brush a little bit in some water before I grab some yellow. It's okay if you get a little bit of yellow in the orange, a little bit of orange in the yellow, that's fine. So again, I'm going to come across here, and I gradually, my brush runs out. This is called a graduated wash because it gradually goes from a darker yellow to a lighter yellow, just because the ink and the pigment are running out. So I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. So this is very symmetrical. Very symmetrical. Alright, now we're going to let that rest for some time. So what we need to do, clean the brush, and we're going to place this to the side somewhere and just let that dry because it has to dry out. Alright, now let's go ahead and take one of our cards. Now, you can use whatever colors you want, but the idea here is going to be to create a wet on wet wash. That means you put water down first, and then you put your colors into that water. And so if you'll watch, I'm going to just take some water. And in fact, I'm going to do, for this one, I'm going to do kind of another type of seascape for this one. So I'm going to take some blue, and I'm going to make another, this time I'm going to use straight blue, and I'm going to go all the way across my page and down. Again, so notice how I'm using it almost like a mop, and this is called a graduated wash. Gradually goes from darker to lighter near the bottom. And again, I want that kind of a nice straight edge to picture something like the sea. Now that's wet. While it's still wet, I am going to take a little bit of purple, and I'm going to put some purple in there up near the top edge. I'm going to spread some purple in there just to mix that and create more of a variegated wash. So again, a little bit of purple just to give it a little bit of depth and feeling. Okay, now in the sky, I'm going to start with straight water. Now the key here is not to allow the water to touch anywhere in this area. We don't want, since this is already wet, we want this to dry just like it is. So what I'm going to do is start a little bit higher with some straight water. A little bit higher, and again, I'm working on a little bit of an angle, so I'm going to keep a little bit of distance between my painting, and I'm just going to put flat water. You can probably not even see it. Then I'm going to dab a little bit of blue and just dip that in there. And watch what happens. It will actually spread and make it look almost like clouds. I'm going to continue that line all the way across, keeping it wet. A little bit more water. And the idea here is not to put too much, just every once in a while to dab to make it look like blue sky and clouds. So I'll do the same thing up here at the top. So I'm putting water down, and then into that water, maybe a little bit of purple. Maybe a little purple here. Purple and blue are kind of nice together, so I'm going to put some of those together. And again, I spread my water across, and while it's still wet, I'm going to mix in just a little dab of blue here and there. All right, so while that's drying, now if you end up with a puddle, what you can do is use this like a mop, and you can squeeze out your brush, and if you find that you're having trouble with little puddles of paint gathering, you can just squeeze it out and mop it up. Squeeze it out and mop it up. Now mine are falling because I'm working on a desk that has an angle to it, which is actually turning out pretty nice. But the idea, what you want to shoot for, is again, you don't want to touch, you don't want these two surfaces touching. You don't want this line to be touched by this line, or else it'll go into it, which is fine, but it looks better if they're separate. So again, one area is supposed to look cloudy using a wet on wet wash. The other area is supposed to look a little bit more like an ocean. And you can always come back and put a little more water on your brush and just kind of re-wet it until you get it where you like it. Not too much. I wouldn't play with it and mess with it too much. Alright, so that one's ready. That's going to be another seascape, more of a cloudy day seascape. On this next piece, what I think I'll do is continue with the graduated wash. And I think what I'm going to do is start with one color, and then the color that logically goes next, I'll fill in with that color. So if you think about the color wheel, and if you start from blue, it would go blue, purple, red, orange, yellow. So I'm going to try to get to all those. So I'm going to start at the top, And I'm going to go blue, and I get one stroke of blue across, blue. Then I'm going to dip and get a little bit of purple, and grab some purple. And again, moving my brush all the way across. I don't want to go too far because I want to fit some more colors in here. Blue, purple, then red. And again, we're going to overlap. So this is kind of a variegated wash as it has a variety of colors in it. Red. And then I dip my brush, wipe it off, and I'm going to go to orange now. And this one, it doesn't really matter. You could do whatever colors you want on this. And then I'm going to finalize it with some yellow. So load my brush up with yellow. As long as you fill the page, and again, if you have any places where you need to mop up because you get too much paint or too much pigment, you can mop those areas up. Just dry off your brush and mop them up. And we're going to let those dry, and we're going to come back and see what we want to do as far as silhouettes. And I'll show you a couple techniques for silhouettes on our paintings. Alright, while we're letting those dry, it's now time to start working on our silhouettes. Now, silhouette, as you can see, is basically a dark area that represents something. So in this case, it represents a seagull. And over here, these represent like an island and some coconut trees in the distance. So we're going to practice our silhouettes. Now, you can use a couple of different tools. You could use, if you want to stay with just the watercolor paint, you could use this smaller sable brush. And I'm going to teach you the dagger stroke with which you can do a lot of fancy things. Now, if you want to be a little more intricate, you could use a Sharpie. And if you want more control, I would recommend use a Sharpie because you're going to get a little more control, and most of you are used to using markers better than you are using watercolors. So I would try both because this is just practice. So take another piece of paper, and I folded this in half, and I would like you to try these, and then on your final you can make the decision that you want to use either Sharpie or you want to stick with the sable brush and make the silhouettes using the brush. Alright, so for the silhouettes you're going to use only the black, and we're going to use what's called a dagger stroke. So we fill the brush, and the idea behind a dagger stroke is this: you push down to give it thickness, and then you pull away to make it thinner. So thick to thin, thick to thin, and you can start to get these cool little effects. Thick to thin, thick to thin. Now what's this remind you of? Maybe a pineapple. Right? If we wanted to make a pineapple silhouette, then this would be how to do it. And then just simply use the brush to fill it in. So here's a pineapple silhouette. So there's something you can do using the dagger stroke. Here's another thing. You can use that same idea, push down, thick to thin, thick to thin, to make two little strokes that resemble a bird, a silhouette of a bird in the distance. And so you can practice that a few times. Thick to thin, thick to thin. And you want the curve to go up. And so you can make them different sizes. You can have a small, make it look like it's further away. See how far you can go with those. But those are bird silhouettes. Here's another idea. So if I was going to do this island with the palm trees, what I would do is I would start with the edge of my brush, thick, and I would just drag it out thin, like that. So it gets a long dagger stroke going from thick to thin. And again, this takes a little bit of practice, but you can do it. And then what I would do is thick to thin for the tree itself, thick to thin. So one's closer, one's further away. And then right up here, thick to thin, thick to thin. And I'm going to make those appear like little palm trees. Going thick to thin, something like that. Okay, so that's the idea. Those are some items you could put in. You could also put in a little sailing ship, a little triangle. That might look nice as well. But again, the idea is to suggest by a shape what the viewer is looking at. To suggest by the shape what the viewer is looking at. All right. So once you've practiced some of those things, now you can take your paper once it's dry. It needs to be completely dry. So don't start too soon. If it's not dry, make sure it's completely dry. And so you could decide, by looking at it, where you think you want your island to be and what you think you might want to do with this. So as I'm looking at this one, I see this little shape. This little shape right here kind of reminds me of a sun peeking through some clouds. So I might want to put my silhouette right here, just like I did in the drawing behind me. But you can consider other angles as well. But I think that's going to look the best. So again, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to drag across and try to get that nice and thin over here. Maybe put a couple little drops so it looks like maybe there's some water going in between the rocks over here. And then again, I'm going to go from thick to thin, thick to thin, and start to put my treetops in. Something like that. All right, then I can always put some birds, thick to thin, long wings, maybe some seagulls here in the backdrop. And again, I'm going to try to get those different sizes so it looks nice. And again, I don't want to clutter the picture too much. Don't want to clutter it too much. And then maybe put a little sailing ship out here. So a little triangle and a line for a little sailing ship. And I think that's it. So you could do that with a Sharpie, or you could do that with the brush, and that's going to be completely up to you. And the last thing I would have you do is I would have you sign it down here. So you're going to want to take maybe your Sharpie and sign your work. In the corner, maybe put the date. So this is the year 2021, so I put the date. Something like that. All right. Excellent. So that's one option. All right. For these others, we can do something similar. If this is going to be a seascape, maybe I also want to include some of those birds in the sky. So again, thick to thin. Maybe that's a large one. Maybe I'll put a medium here. And maybe a small one way back here. And then maybe there's a ship out there at sea. Again, just something, again, not too much, just enough to give it a nice effect. And again, you'd want to sign this when you're done. All right, now for this last one, I'll use the Sharpie just to break it up a little bit. So we could do a couple things. We could put it sideways. You could put it upside down. I would recommend go online and search up the term silhouette. Watercolor Silhouettes. When you search up Watercolor Silhouettes, you're going to get a lot of good results. So Watercolor Silhouettes give you a lot of cool things to look at. So I'll just do Watercolor Silhouettes and find something interesting. Use gear. I come down off the hill. Brush. All right, so we have these 3 paintings. Now what you could do when these edges start to curl up, you could put them on a flat surface, put them between 2 books, and that'll keep them nice and flat for you. And then at some point you can paste them onto a nice little cover. But again, there's 3 silhouette paintings using watercolor.